Welcome to the Complete History of America.
In 1776, 13 colonies on the eastern seaboard of North America stood united in their desire for freedom from British rule. But how did they go from being a few small, struggling settlements to an independent, formidable nation? The answer lies in the American Revolution. The story of the U.S. begins with a desire for independence, but it didn't happen overnight. For many years, the colonies had been part of the British Empire, paying taxes and following British laws, but with little say in how they were governed. Tensions between the colonies and Britain started to build up due to unfair taxation, without representation in the British Parliament. The Stamp Act, Townshend Acts, and the infamous tea tax sparked outrage among the colonists, eventually leading to events like the Boston Tea Party in 1773. This defiance against British rule was a clear sign that the relationship was becoming untenable. By 1776, the situation had reached a boiling point. The colonies were no longer just discontented subjects of the British Crown, they were determined to seek independence. The Declaration of Independence, penned primarily by Thomas Jefferson, was the defining document of this rebellion. On July 4, 1776, the Second Continental Congress officially declared that the colonies were free and independent states, severing ties with Britain. This momentous event marked the birth of the United States of America. It wasn't just a political move, it was a statement of principles. The Declaration's words about unalienable rights and the pursuit of happiness would echo for centuries, becoming the foundation for the country's values. But the fight for independence was far from over. The Declaration of Independence wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a declaration of war. The American Revolution began in 1775 with the battles of Lexington and Concord and lasted until 1783. The British, the world's most powerful empire at the time, underestimated the resolve of the American colonies. It was a war of attrition, small victories here, brutal defeats there. But through it all, the Americans kept fighting, relying on guerrilla tactics, strategic alliances, and the leadership of General George Washington. The turning point came when the French allied with the American forces in 1778, providing crucial military and financial support. The decisive victory came in 1781 at the Siege of Yorktown, where the British forces, led by General Cornwallis, were forced to surrender. This effectively ended the war and secured America's independence. The Treaty of Paris in 1783 officially ended the Revolutionary War and recognized the United States as a sovereign nation. The treaty expanded U.S. territory beyond the original 13 colonies, granting the new country land stretching all the way to the Mississippi River. This was the first crucial step in establishing America as a force to be reckoned with. But securing independence was only part of the story. Now, the United States had to form a government and unify its people. In 1803, just a few decades after gaining independence, the United States made a major land acquisition through the Louisiana Purchase. President Thomas Jefferson struck a deal with France, purchasing over 828,000 square miles of land for just $15 million. This nearly doubled the size of the country and opened up the entire western frontier for settlement. The Louisiana Purchase wasn't just about land, it was a statement that the U.S. was expanding its reach and its power. With more land came more resources, more settlers, and more influence on the world stage. Throughout the 19th century, the idea of manifest destiny drove America's expansion westward. Americans believed it was their right and destiny to spread across the continent, from the Atlantic to the Pacific. This belief led to conflicts with Native American tribes, wars with Mexico, and the eventual admission of new states to the Union. This expansion wasn't without controversy. It led to the displacement of Native American populations, the annexation of Texas, and the Mexican-American War, which ultimately resulted in the acquisition of present-day California, Arizona, and other southwestern territories. Conclusion of Chapter 1. So, in less than a century, the U.S. transformed from a fledgling nation of 13 colonies into a sprawling nation with vast resources and territory. But independence wasn't the only thing that was gained, it was the beginning of a long journey of shaping the United States into a global force. The early years of the United States were defined by a fight for independence, territorial expansion, and the laying down of the principles that would guide the nation into the future. In the 19th century, America wasn't just growing in size, it was transforming its economy from one based on agriculture to one powered by industry. The Industrial Revolution didn't just change the United States, it reshaped the entire world. But how did this new wave of industry help the U.S. become an economic giant? The Industrial Revolution first began in Europe, particularly in Great Britain, but by the early 1800s, its influence began to spread across the Atlantic, and the United States was poised to become one of its most significant beneficiaries. The spark for industrialization in the U.S. came with innovations like the cotton gin, invented by Eli Whitney in 1793. This invention dramatically boosted cotton production in the South, leading to a growing demand for textile manufacturing in the North. At the same time, new technologies like the steam engine, invented by James Watt, and the telegraph, by Samuel Morse, were transforming how goods and information traveled, laying the groundwork for economic expansion. By the early 1800s, factory systems began to emerge in the North, especially in places like New England, where access to water power helped fuel early industrial growth. The rise of textile mills, iron works, and manufacturing centers created an economic boom. The shift from individual craft production to mass production in factories changed everything. It allowed for goods to be produced more efficiently, which meant cheaper products, more jobs, and higher profits. The textile industry and the railroad system were particularly instrumental in driving America's industrial rise. As factories expanded, so did the need for workers. Cities like New York, Chicago, and Boston grew rapidly as people moved from rural areas to urban centers in search of factory jobs. The immigration boom also contributed to this workforce expansion, as people from Europe flocked to the U.S. for better opportunities. One of the greatest symbols of America's industrial rise was the railroad. By the mid-1800s, railroads were expanding across the nation, linking cities and regions together in ways never before imagined. The Transcontinental Railroad, completed in 1869, was the crowning achievement of this period, connecting the East Coast to the West Coast for the first time. The expansion of the railroad network didn't just change transportation, it transformed the entire economy. Raw materials like coal, iron, and timber could be transported efficiently to factories, and finished products could reach consumers far and wide. It helped create a truly national economy. Railroads also fueled the rise of other industries, such as steel. The need for railroad tracks created massive demand for steel, leading to the growth of major steel companies, most famously led by Andrew Carnegie. As industrialization spread, technological innovations became the driving force behind economic growth. America became a hub for invention and innovation, and some of the most famous names in U.S. history emerged during this period. Let's talk about Thomas Edison, for example. He didn't just invent the light bulb, he helped build the foundation for modern electric power systems, which became essential for factories and homes across the country. At the same time, Henry Ford revolutionized manufacturing with his introduction of the assembly line in 1913. Ford's use of mass production techniques in automobile manufacturing made cars more affordable and accessible to the average American, which in turn stimulated the economy. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the U.S. had become a breeding ground for big business. John D. Rockefeller in oil, Andrew Carnegie in steel, and the Morgan family in finance were amassing fortunes and monopolies, shaping the American economy into the powerhouse we know today. As the economy grew, so did the middle class. The rise of industry and innovation meant that people could make more money, purchase more goods, and live more comfortably. The concept of a consumer culture took root, and advertisements for products like cars, appliances, and furniture began to dominate the media. The middle class became a powerful economic force in itself. People could now afford to buy things that once seemed out of reach. This consumption further fueled the growth of industries, as demand for goods increased. It was a cycle of growth and prosperity, and it continued to feed on itself. Behind much of this growth was the support of the U.S. government. Public policy, land grants, and infrastructure projects all helped facilitate industrial development. The government passed laws that encouraged railroads, built dams, and supported innovations with patents. For example, the Homestead Act of 1862 provided free land to settlers, spurring the expansion of agriculture in towns in the West. And the government's role in protecting intellectual property, through patents, helped ensure that inventors and entrepreneurs were incentivized to create new technologies. By the late 1800s, the U.S. had emerged as one of the world's leading economic powers. It had not only become the world's largest producer of industrial goods but was also a key player in global trade. Its raw materials and manufactured goods flowed into international markets, expanding its influence worldwide. By the time the U.S. entered the 20th century, it wasn't just an economic force on the continent. It was on the verge of becoming an international superpower, with an economic reach that stretched across the globe. Conclusion of Chapter 2. So, the industrialization of the U.S. was not just about new machines and factories, it was about creating a new economic landscape. It gave rise to powerful businesses, a growing middle class, and new technologies that would lay the foundation for America's global economic dominance. But this wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. The next phase of U.S. growth would come through its military power and involvement in world events. From factories to farms, railroads to automobiles, and steel to electricity, the U.S. had transformed itself into an economic juggernaut. While industrial power was crucial in shaping the U.S. economy, military might and global influence were equally essential in securing its place on the world stage. From the American Civil War to World War I and World War II, the U.S. military not only defended the nation but also expanded its influence across the globe. The American Civil War, which raged from 1861 to 1865, was not just a battle for the future of the nation, it was a test of the strength and unity of the United States. It solidified the power of the federal government, abolished slavery, and played a crucial role in the country's military and economic development. The Civil War was a turning point in many ways. The Union's victory not only preserved the United States but also laid the foundation for the U.S. to become a powerful industrial and military nation. During the war, the Union Army developed new tactics, technologies, and the first modern forms of warfare, such as ironclad ships and the use of railroads for troop movements. By the end of the war, the Union Army had gained invaluable military experience, which would come to define U.S. military power in the future. The war also demonstrated that a unified military under the command of a strong central government was crucial for national security. The Civil War also marked the beginning of a trend in which the U.S. would continue to grow as a military power, modernizing its army and navy as the country expanded westward and increasingly engaged with global powers. Fast forward to 1898, and the U.S. had transformed from a collection of independent states into an emerging global power. The Spanish-American War marked the first time that the United States projected its military power far beyond its borders. The Spanish-American War was a short conflict, but its impact was huge. With the defeat of Spain, the United States gained control of overseas territories like Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and Guam, marking the beginning of America's imperial ambitions. The war demonstrated that the U.S. was no longer just a continental power. It was now a player in international affairs, with a navy capable of projecting power across oceans and an army that could fight on foreign soil. World War I was a major turning point for the U.S. It marked the nation's transition from a relatively isolationist country to an active participant in global affairs. Though the U.S. initially sought to stay out of the war, the country eventually entered on the side of the Allied powers in 1917. By then, the war had already been raging for several years, but the U.S. military quickly turned the tide with fresh troops and resources. American troops, led by General John J. Pershing, played a decisive role in breaking the stalemate of trench warfare on the Western Front. The U.S. also contributed massive financial and industrial support, ensuring that the Allies could continue fighting against the Central Powers. America's involvement in World War I established it as one of the leading global powers. It was clear that the U.S. military was not just a regional force, it could influence global outcomes. The Treaty of Versailles, which ended the war, saw the U.S. emerge as a dominant military and economic force. However, it was World War II that truly cemented the United States as the world's most powerful military force. After initially remaining neutral, the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941 thrust the U.S. into the war. America's entry into World War II marked a game-changing shift in global power dynamics. By the end of the war in 1945, the U.S. had not only helped defeat Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan but had also become the leader of the Allied powers and the world's dominant military force. The U.S. military, armed with modern technology like tanks, aircraft, and nuclear weapons, played a decisive role in battles across Europe, Africa, and the Pacific. The D-Day landings and the Pacific Island hopping campaign showed the U.S.'s ability to wage war on multiple fronts with overwhelming power. And let's not forget the atomic bomb. The United States was the first, and remains the only, country to use nuclear weapons in warfare. The bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki forced Japan to surrender, effectively ending World War II. By the end of the war, the U.S. had emerged not just as a military victor but as the world's new superpower. Along with the Soviet Union, the U.S. became one of the two global superpowers, setting the stage for the Cold War. The post-World War II era ushered in a new phase for the U.S. as it faced off against the Soviet Union in the Cold War. While the Cold War was largely a battle of ideologies, capitalism versus communism, it also played out in the military sphere. Throughout the Cold War, the United States maintained a massive military presence, not only in the Western Hemisphere but around the globe. The military-industrial complex boomed, and the U.S. became the world's leading supplier of weapons and military technology. The Korean War, the Vietnam War, and conflicts in Latin America demonstrated America's willingness to intervene militarily to contain the spread of communism. Meanwhile, the space race with the Soviet Union further established U.S. technological and military dominance, especially after the moon landing in 1969. Even today, the United States maintains the most advanced and powerful military in the world. With military bases spread across almost every continent, the U.S. can project its power anywhere and respond to threats swiftly. From its dominance in NATO, its leadership in UN peacekeeping operations, and its military presence in conflict zones like the Middle East, the U.S. military plays a crucial role in global geopolitics. Conclusion of Chapter 3. From the early battles of the Civil War to the global conflicts of World War I and World War II, military strength was central to the United States' rise to power. America's ability to project force across the globe, win wars decisively, and shape international relations gave it not just influence, but unmatched dominance. Military power, combined with technological innovation and economic strength, propelled the U.S. to superpower status. But as the world changed, so did America's role. Let's see how the next chapter in U.S. history shaped its place in the world today. While military power and economic might were essential to the rise of the United States, it was also its diplomatic strategies, political leadership, and ability to forge international alliances that helped it solidify its place as a global superpower. In its early years, the United States was shaped by a doctrine of isolationism, especially under its first president, George Washington. Washington's famous farewell address in 1796 warned against permanent alliances with foreign nations, urging the U.S. to avoid becoming entangled in European conflicts. This policy of isolationism characterized much of the U.S.'s foreign relations during the 19th century. The country was focused on internal growth, expanding westward, and building its economy. However, as the U.S. grew in power and influence, it became harder to maintain strict isolation. Still, the U.S. did make strategic political moves, such as the Monroe Doctrine in 1823. This doctrine declared that European powers should not interfere in the affairs of the Western Hemisphere, essentially establishing the U.S. as the dominant political force in the Americas. By the late 1800s, the U.S. had begun to stretch its diplomatic muscles. The Spanish-American War, 1898, marked the shift from isolationism to an active global presence. With the acquisition of territories like Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and Guam, the United States emerged as an imperial power in the Western Pacific. President Theodore Roosevelt, in particular, pushed for a more active foreign policy. His famous big stick diplomacy reflected his belief in military strength to back up diplomacy, particularly in Latin America and the Caribbean. This led to the construction of the Panama Canal, a crucial waterway connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans and solidifying U.S. influence in the region. Roosevelt's foreign policy made it clear that the U.S. was no longer just concerned with internal matters. It now had a significant stake in global affairs, and its political leadership was increasingly shaping the international order. World War I marked another crucial turning point for U.S. diplomacy. After the war, President Woodrow Wilson took center stage on the global stage, advocating for the creation of the League of Nations to ensure lasting peace and promote diplomacy over warfare. Wilson's 14 points outlined his vision for a peaceful world order, with an emphasis on self-determination, open diplomacy, and a collective security agreement through the League of Nations. Though the U.S. did not ultimately join the League, Wilson's role in shaping post-war diplomacy demonstrated that the U.S. was a key player in global governance. Even though the U.S. didn't join the League of Nations, the war and Wilson's efforts proved that America's political leadership could no longer be ignored. The U.S. had cemented its place as an influential global power. World War II was a defining moment in U.S. diplomacy. After the war ended in 1945, the U.S. emerged as one of the two global superpowers, along with the Soviet Union. But unlike the Soviet Union, the United States took an active role in shaping the post-war world order. President Franklin D. Roosevelt helped form the United Nations in 1945, an international organization designed to promote peace, security, and cooperation among nations. This marked the beginning of U.S. leadership in global diplomacy, as it sought to prevent future conflicts and promote democratic values worldwide. The U.S. played a leading role in drafting the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, establishing NATO in 1949 as a military alliance, and providing economic aid to Europe through programs like the Marshall Plan, a critical part of the rebuilding effort after the war. This solidified U.S. leadership in both military and diplomatic affairs. The Cold War, which began after World War II and lasted for nearly half a century, was largely a battle of ideologies, capitalism versus communism, and the U.S. emerged as the leader of the capitalist bloc. U.S. political leadership during the Cold War was key in shaping the world's response to the Soviet Union. Presidents like Harry Truman, John F. Kennedy, and Ronald Reagan implemented policies to contain communism, leading to pivotal moments like the Cuban Missile Crisis, Korean War, and Vietnam War. Diplomatically, the U.S. created alliances with Western Europe through NATO, promoted democracy and market economies, and used economic aid to influence countries in the developing world. The U.S. political strategy was often a mix of coercion, through military force when necessary, and soft power, through diplomacy and economic incentives. The Marshall Plan in Europe and foreign aid programs in Asia and Latin America were tools that strengthened U.S. influence in regions that were vulnerable to communism, further positioning the U.S. as the global leader. Today, the United States continues to wield significant diplomatic power. It remains a leading member of international organizations like the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, and the G7. U.S. political leadership still shapes global economic policies, human rights initiatives, and international security concerns. For example, the U.S. has been a key player in crafting global trade agreements, such as NAFTA and more recently the USMCA, United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement. On the world stage, U.S. Diplomacy continues to influence everything from international climate policies to human rights and global peacekeeping operations. Whether through direct military interventions, international peacekeeping efforts, or economic influence, the U.S. political system has positioned itself at the center of global governance. The country remains a leader in international diplomacy, using its influence to shape the future of global politics and international cooperation. Conclusion of Chapter 4. The United States' diplomatic prowess, forged through centuries of political leadership, has been just as instrumental in its rise to power as its military and economic might. From the early days of isolationism to becoming a dominant player in global affairs, U.S. political leadership has shaped the international order, and its role in diplomacy remains pivotal today. By navigating complex political landscapes, forging crucial alliances, and shaping global institutions, the United States has solidified its role as a leader in international diplomacy, a key element of its superpower status. While the United States became a dominant superpower through military and economic means, its cultural influence has also been a critical tool for solidifying its status as the most powerful country in the world. This form of influence, known as soft power, has helped shape the way the world sees America and its values. One of the most obvious forms of American cultural influence comes from Hollywood, the birthplace of the global film industry. Hollywood movies and television shows have been watched across the world for decades, and they've helped spread American values, ideals, and lifestyles. Since the early 20th century, Hollywood has churned out countless movies, TV shows, and documentaries that not only entertain but also shape global perceptions of the United States. Iconic films such as Casablanca, Star Wars, and The Godfather, as well as modern blockbusters like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, have reached billions of viewers worldwide. Hollywood's dominance of the global film industry has created an undeniable soft power for the U.S. Through its storytelling, Hollywood projects American ideals like individualism, freedom, and democracy to audiences far beyond its borders. This cultural export has not only shaped perceptions of American life but also influenced global tastes, fashion, and trends. From action-packed movies to teen dramas, U.S. entertainment has built an emotional connection with people from all cultures, creating a positive image of the U.S. across the world. Another key element of America's cultural influence is its music. American genres like jazz, rock and roll, blues, hip-hop, and pop music have not only dominated the music industry but have become key symbols of American culture worldwide. Think about how iconic American musicians like Elvis Presley, Michael Jackson, Madonna, Beyoncé, and Jay-Z have helped spread American culture globally. Their music transcends borders and languages, resonating with people from diverse backgrounds and influencing countless artists around the world. The global reach of American music is undeniable. The U.S. has been the birthplace of many of the most influential music movements, from jazz in New Orleans to hip-hop in the Bronx. Even today, American artists dominate global charts and cultural conversations, contributing to a sense of global American identity. Pop culture, especially through music, has united people of different nationalities and backgrounds. The influence of Hollywood movies and American music has helped the U.S. shape global culture while spreading its values of freedom, creativity, and individual expression. American consumer culture has also spread across the globe, especially through fast food chains like McDonald's, Starbucks, and Coca-Cola. These brands have become symbols of American capitalism and innovation, reshaping eating habits and lifestyles in countries around the world. For example, McDonald's has more than 38,000 restaurants in over 100 countries. The Golden Arches are recognized as a global symbol of American culture and business. As more people eat at McDonald's or sip Starbucks coffee, they are subtly exposed to American culture, often associating it with modernity, convenience, and entertainment. While critics argue that the global spread of fast food is a form of cultural imperialism, there's no denying that these iconic American brands are a reflection of the nation's influence. Through these consumer products, the U.S. has projected its way of life to millions of people, shaping the way they live, eat, and even socialize. Another cornerstone of American soft power is its technological innovation. Silicon Valley, home to tech giants like Apple, Google, and Facebook, has become a global hub of technological development, pushing the U.S. to the forefront of the digital revolution. From the personal computer to the smartphone to social media, America has led the way in shaping modern life through technology. Apple has transformed how people communicate, work, and entertain themselves. Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter have connected billions of people globally, creating a space for social and cultural exchange. The U.S. is often seen as the birthplace of innovation and technological breakthroughs. The influence of American tech extends beyond just the products themselves. It also includes the business models, entrepreneurial spirit, and startup culture that have been adopted by countries around the world. When people use iPhones or Google search, they are engaging with a part of American culture, a culture built on creativity, disruption, and entrepreneurship. It's a cultural exchange that drives the idea that the U.S. is a leader in shaping the future. The U.S. is also home to many of the world's top universities, including Harvard, MIT, and Stanford, which attract students from across the globe. This gives the U.S. significant cultural influence as its higher education system shapes global leaders, innovators, and thinkers. Every year, thousands of students from countries around the world travel to the United States for a world-class education. Many of these students return to their home countries as global leaders, carrying with them not just a degree but American ideals of innovation, freedom, and opportunity. The U.S. higher education system is often seen as a global standard, and its universities continue to attract international students. This cultural influence creates networks of alumni who promote American values and help build bridges between the U.S. and the rest of the world. Conclusion of Chapter 5. Through Hollywood, music, consumer brands, technology, and education, the United States has spread its culture and ideals around the world. This form of soft power has allowed America to shape global values and perceptions, contributing significantly to its rise as a global superpower. While military and economic might are essential to the U.S.'s dominance, its cultural influence is just as important. By promoting American culture and ideas, the U.S. has won hearts and minds around the world, ensuring its continued leadership on the global stage. Alongside its military, economic, and cultural dominance, the United States has risen to global power through its technological and scientific innovations. From landing on the moon to the creation of the personal computer, American ingenuity has shaped the world and driven the country's rise as a leader in the modern age. One of the most iconic chapters in American technological advancement is the space race during the Cold War. The U.S. achieved a major milestone with the Apollo 11 mission in 1969, when Neil Armstrong became the first human to walk on the moon. This event marked not only a triumph for American technology but also a symbol of U.S. leadership in space exploration. The U.S. was able to leap ahead of the Soviet Union, demonstrating both its technical expertise and its ability to mobilize resources to achieve extraordinary goals. The success of NASA and its space programs turned the U.S. into a global leader in scientific research and technological development. The space program also had ripple effects on many other industries. It led to innovations like satellite communication, GPS technology, and even advancements in materials science. Today, the U.S. continues to be a leader in space exploration, with companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin pushing the boundaries of private sector space travel. Space exploration not only served military and scientific purposes but also fueled American pride and demonstrated the nation's capacity for innovation and achievement, reinforcing its position as a global leader in science and technology. Another major milestone in American technological advancement was the digital revolution, which was centered in Silicon Valley. During the late 20th century, American companies like Apple, Microsoft, and Intel revolutionized the way the world communicated, worked, and lived. The creation of the personal computer, spearheaded by pioneers like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, brought technology to homes and businesses around the world. The Internet became a powerful tool for communication and commerce, allowing the U.S. to dominate the digital age. Silicon Valley became the epicenter of technological innovation, and companies like Google and Facebook transformed the way people interacted, accessed information, and engaged with each other. Today, the U.S. remains home to the largest tech companies in the world, shaping industries like social media, e-commerce, and artificial intelligence. The rise of tech giants and innovations in digital platforms has reshaped industries worldwide. The dominance of American tech companies has given the U.S. not only an economic advantage but also geopolitical influence. These technologies have influenced global economies and cultures, making American companies synonymous with progress and technological leadership. The United States has long been a leader in medical research and healthcare innovation. American universities, research institutions, and pharmaceutical companies have developed groundbreaking treatments, vaccines, and technologies that have saved millions of lives and improved global health. In fact, many of the most significant medical discoveries, such as the development of the polio vaccine by Jonas Salk and the creation of mRNA vaccines during the COVID-19 pandemic, were made in the U.S. American healthcare research has had far-reaching impacts on global health standards, making it a key player in worldwide public health. In addition to healthcare innovations, U.S.-based companies like Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson are global leaders in pharmaceutical production, while institutions like the Mayo Clinic and Johns Hopkins University continue to shape modern medicine. America's leadership in biotech, pharmaceuticals, and health research not only enhances global healthcare but also reinforces the country's image as a place of innovation, where life-saving technologies are created and exported around the world. American advancements in military technology have been a cornerstone of its rise as a global superpower. The U.S. military is equipped with cutting-edge technologies, including advanced fighter jets, drones, cybersecurity technologies, and even nuclear weapons. The F-35 fighter jet, stealth bombers, and drones have revolutionized the way the U.S. conducts military operations, giving it unparalleled capabilities to project power globally. Additionally, America's dominance in cybersecurity and intelligence technology has allowed it to maintain a competitive edge in the modern warfare landscape. The U.S. is also the leading developer of nuclear technology, with a robust nuclear arsenal that serves as both a deterrent and a symbol of its military might. This technological prowess is essential to maintaining its superpower status in a rapidly evolving world. Technological advancements in defense and security ensure that the United States remains a dominant force in global geopolitics. Its military edge allows it to maintain global influence and uphold its role as a leader in both peacekeeping and military engagements.